I recently covered global exception handling in both the .NET Minimal APIs as in the .NET Web APIs. In those videos, I showed you how to make your own custom exception objects and how to handle those globally by either using an endpoint filter in the Minimal API, a action filter in the .NET Web API, or write your own custom middleware to handle those, or by using the out-of-the-box exception handling middleware. Now I'll try out an alternative approach in which we'll return result objects. That could be a success result or a failure result. What I like about this result approach is that it's explicit. Your method does what it says it does. So the method name will give you an indication of what the method does, and then the result type will tell you exactly what to expect. And in my opinion, it's nearly as elegant to work with because there are similarities between the two approaches. With the custom exceptions approach, you could create your own custom exceptions and throw them. With the return results approach, you create your custom error objects and return them. And I agree that you don't always need to throw exceptions for expected unhappy scenarios, for scenarios that are not that critical. An added benefit is that it would be more performant than throwing exceptions. But what I like about throwing exceptions is that you can throw your custom exceptions and globally handle them, translate them into the proper API result, like the bad request or the 404 not found. And it guarantees that the code execution exits where I throw that exception. I'm going to follow Milan's sources to implement that result approach. So the blog post of Milan, and then Milan also shared a GitHub gist with me, where you can find all of the code related to that result. And he covered it multiple times in his videos, which you can see on screen. So make sure to check that out. Okay, so let's take this code where I try to get a user by email. Let's say I made a spelling mistake. Then it's possible that there was no user found, and then I throw this new not found exception because it's pointless to continue with the other logic if there is no user to apply this logic on, and that would just result in errors or exceptions themselves. So I throw this exception to exit the code there, and that will give me a guarantee that that happens and won't continue. And then I handle these exceptions in a global manner with an API exception handler on my API endpoints. Let's take a look at that. I moved that over to a NuGet package, an endpoint exception filter that would try catch. So now I'm throwing that not found exception, and then it simply does a switch expression on the type of the exception. So in this case, the not found exception, and then it will handle that, well, translate that into a proper API result. So let's see, handle not found exception. It will then return a results.notfound, so a 404 with a title and, well, a properly formatted API result. And what is this not found exception exactly? That's just a simple custom class that inherits from the base exception. And of course, I need to make sure that either I apply that endpoint exception filter on my route group, on an individual route, or just on my app, more like as a global middleware or filter. And now I'll just copy over some of Milan's code, starting with the error object, which is similar as that base exception. This would look as follows. It accepts a string code and a description. The code will more be like the key, like in all in caps, user underscore not underscore found, for example, and then the description can be, well, the error message, so in a human readable string, the key will more likely be some kind of key that you can then maybe map on, or maybe you need to translate based on that key into your native language, something like that. This first property, none of type error, is basically what you would return in a success case when there is no error, no failure. We'll see more about that later. But because we're always returning something, we'll either need to return a success or a failure. And I added a few general properties, not found, forbidden, in case I need that. And then I can make my custom error objects. Okay, this doesn't translate the same, but maybe you can then make it into a method and say string name, string key, however we want to. And let's see which other exceptions we can replace. So got a not found exception, and then a validation exception, and sometimes a forbidden access exception, but we don't pass anything down. So we could just use the general one we made in the error object. Let's take a look at a validation exception. So now we could already say return, return user errors dot not found, and pass the name of user, just testing if we can use it the same way, like that. Then of course our task.handle should reflect that we can. So, and I was talking about that error.none. So we would likely, I'm just gonna put it here. More about that later. We could probably just return error.none, just so we return the type an error object in on both the unsuccessful path as on the successful path. Now, it kind of looks strange to return error.none in a success path, but we'll fix that later. So instead of, we're gonna do it proper right away, instead of this validation failure, which is, yeah, I just put it there because I'm lazy, I guess. This isn't really triggered by validation. Well, something went wrong, we can be sure that it's a validation issue. So I'm just going to, let's see, if result not succeeded, maybe we just want to return a specific error. So that could look as follows: reset password error. Well, we kind of, it's likely always going to be user, so maybe we don't need that name. Let's see. But that key can be either ID or email or anything else. Let's see. Then here, user, something like that. And then we can just user errors.reset password. I'm not going to call it failed to reset password because we already know that it's an error, user error. Maybe we can just do name of user errors or something. We can clean this one up similarly. Let's quickly do that. So return, say user errors dot not found, and just pass request dot user ID. likely have to say to string, if I'm not mistaken. And then we potentially have multiple errors in here. Let's just join them with a comma, but yeah, we'll improve that later. This could be a validation error, but let's replace it by a user registration error. Something like this: registration, pass down a description, and yeah. I made this forbidden error, forbidden access for the authentication stuff. Then I'm just going to return that here. And the reason I'm actually doing this is because I might move all of this authentication code into NuGet packages, and it would be not that good of a practice to be throwing exceptions and to be that implicit. So if anyone then tries to use my package and they're constantly getting exceptions that they weren't expecting or that they didn't know could happen or weren't documented properly, that wouldn't be a great experience for working with my NuGet packages. So I hope to be a bit more explicit by using these errors. Let's now get rid of all of these red lines by using the result class. So I pasted in the code coming from Milan's blog in a new class called result. And in here we have a few properties: is success, is failure, the error, which can contain that custom error object, and then the methods success and failure. And failure, you can pass your custom error object. And the success, like I explained before, will return that error.none. So that's going to be nicer to return. So let's take a look at this refresh token. Instead of returning an error, we'll just return a result. And then, instead of all of these, we are going to return a result.failure and pass our custom error. And then at the bottom, we will return a result.success. Now every path in our code returns a result object, either failure or success. But now we also have to cover this case in which it can either return a result, so failure or success, but it should also be possible to return the actual user object. So for that, we'll need to add some methods in our result class to support those scenarios. So for the success, we'll add a method with the value. And for failure, we'll add... It's getting a bit more complex, but it will make sense in a bit. So we're going to add this create, which will actually... And now that we're here, let's also just copy the result constructor. And then I copied over this result that accepts a generic type from Milan's gist. And that would allow us to have a result and then pass, for example, the user type. Well, and for these lines, condition not met and error.none, I had to add these two properties in the error object. And what this implicit operator should allow us to do is, so instead of repeating all of these result.failures, it should should allow us to just return a error object, and that should be accepted as a result return type. Now that we have this result return type, we can actually act on it. So before it was throwing exceptions and we had that guarantee that the code would exit there, but now it's returning, so we need to make sure that the methods that call this logic that they properly handle that, because otherwise we might introduce bugs, otherwise the code execution might continue while we actually didn't want it to continue. So we need to be explicit and we need to handle all of these results, which is one of the things I didn't like before, because it, like I said, it opens up risk to bugs. So then we would likely add an if statement, if result dot is failure, and then we'd probably want to return, and then an API results object like bad request. Could not, well, we can probably access D. Since it's a failure, we should be able to access the error object, and then likely the description, or maybe the object as a whole, and then that should return to the API consumer a code and a description of what went wrong. And only now we're sure that the code won't execute further. So now we still have this problem. So we return a result with the type of user, since a new user can be returned, but also an error object can be returned. So there's a mismatch again. So I assume we can fix that by like this. So result error failure and pass the user type. And for the success part, we should likely return the result dot success, pass down the user. And now, of course, we need to adapt our code to handle that response. So it's no longer a new user now, it's kind of a result or a user result, name it as you want. And let's see, result.value we can use now. That's cool. So, and then we'll have to say if result dot is failure, and then return a results dot bad request or something like that, result dot error. And where we're already in the API endpoint, we could just directly return a results object from the minimal API, let's say bad request, and just pass our custom error object, user result, to be more explicit instead of calling everything result. Let's see, current user result dot is failure, return results dot bad request, current user result dot error. And now I need to make sure that I handle these result types everywhere. And that's what I mentioned, that I don't like that much about it, because I feel like sooner or later it will bite me. And what I wanted to show you is this user manager comes from identity from Microsoft itself. And if you hover over the return types there, you'll see an identity result, which is a bit similar if we really dive into that. You'll also see properties with success, failure with errors that can hold errors, like a failed method and all that. So it's a more common practice to have explicit return types, explicit result types, when you're creating NuGet packages for the general public. And then the last thing on Milan's blog is the result extension. Let's copy that one over. And then we've got another problem here. Let's see. Oops. Let's try it like that. But the point of this one is it's kind of doing this inline conditional, so checking whether it's successful or not and passing down that error object if it isn't. So this would be an easy case. So we do this in multiple places, checking whether it's a failure. If it's so, return a bad request, else return a success status code. Yeah, of course, it's probably set result.match. Let's try. Okay, we can use it like that. Let's see. Convert into a method group. Does that matter? Errors never used. Let's see how that behaves, because the error needs to be passed, right? Yeah, it's going to be passed from the result, since it's an extension on the result object, and the result object has that error property. We could write it like this, it seems. I'm going to end the video here with some final thoughts. My first thought about this is that I do really like this approach, since it's explicit and it has some similarities as the custom exception throwing approach. I do like that we can create these custom error objects similarly as we created the custom exceptions. I only created about 3 or 4 custom exceptions, so I might only need 3 or 4 custom error objects or properties as well. So I might take the same approach and just make sure that I can pass the name of the entity that the error is about, just as a parameter. And I did need to mention as well that there is already a well-established package out there that contains similar functionality, so result.fail or .success, and much more. And then finally, I'll really consider this approach or something similar when I develop NuGet packages, or that could have even worked well with my brand website modules, in which it was more the responsibility of the implementation project to choose or to decide how they want to handle exceptions or errors. The code of those modules is available on my Patreon that contains an entire brand website with fully working blog functionality, written markdown, metrics, all kinds of features to engage with your audience. For only $30, you can get access to all of the code, reuse it as you please, learn from the code, reuse the code, build your own brand website or portfolio. And I'll likely put all of the produced code from my videos as usual on Patreon, so you can get that on Patreon/KisStupid. If you become a member, you can access all of my best code. And if you want some free code, you can get the original code from my best NuGet package for free on kiscode.com. Don't forget to like and subscribe, because there's many more cool videos to come. Do let me know in the comments, what do you prefer, the custom exception throwing approach or the explicit result returning approach? Let me know, and don't forget to like the video if this had any value to you.